I stood there holding a photo album I had spent weeks making. It was filled with memories: Mark's first birthday, our old yellow kitchen, his graduation in the rain. I gave it to him with a full heart, hoping he'd remember the woman who gave up everything for him. Clarissa laughed, said I should have just brought a coupon for soup. And when I tried to explain, she slapped me. Right there, in the middle of a fancy restaurant. Her nails left a sting that went deeper than my skin. My son didn't say a word. He just watched. That was the night I realized I was utterly alone. But it was also the night something inside me woke up. Stay with me till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far the truth really spreads. I was just trying to make his birthday special. Mark had always loved old photos, and I spent 3 months putting together that album. Every page held pieces of our life: his baby footprints, crayon drawings from first-grade pictures from the day he graduated law school. I tied it all together with a ribbon and a small card that simply said, "You'll always be my greatest gift." The restaurant was too loud, too fancy, not really my kind of place, but I smiled when I walked in. Clarissa wore her usual perfect-look red lips and cold eyes. She gave me a once-over, then looked past me like I didn't matter. Mark hugged me quickly, his arms stiff, distracted. I held on to that brief touch a second longer than he did. When it came time for gifts, she opened the album before he did. Her eyebrows lifted, then she chuckled like it was the most ridiculous thing she'd ever seen. She waved it toward their friends at the table. "Can you believe this?" she said to no one in particular. "A scrapbook." I reached across gently. "I just thought he might like to remember where he came from." Clarissa's hand slapped mine away. Her voice snapped like dry wood. "What he needs is a Rolex, not some charity craft from a broke old lady." The whole table fell quiet. I froze, unsure whether to defend myself or disappear. Mark sat back in his chair, rubbed his chin like this was just another inconvenience in his day. I turned to him, waiting for him to say something, anything. He didn't. Clarissa rolled her eyes. "You're embarrassing. Always showing up with nothing and expecting applause." I swallowed hard and stood. My knees ached, but I didn't want to cry in front of them. I reached for the album to take it back. Maybe I could save it for another time, or maybe I was just trying to salvage my pride. Clarissa grabbed it first, then threw it across the table. It landed in someone's soup bowl. The ribbon floated soaked, and a photo of Mark's third birthday curled into the broth. The air left my lungs. That was when I whispered I raised him alone. She stood. And I guess that's why he turned out weak. Before I could step back, her hand came across my face. Not a tap. Not a warning. A hard, deliberate slap that echoed louder than the clinking glasses and piano music. I staggered back more from shock than pain. No one said a word. I looked at Mark, my son, my boy who once cried when he scraped his knee and ran to me for comfort. He looked away, picked up his wine glass like nothing had happened. The heat in my cheek was nothing compared to the burn inside my chest. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, but no one moved. Not even the waiter. I steadied myself, picked up my purse, and walked out. Outside, the night felt colder than it should have. My hands were shaking, but not from the temperature. Somewhere behind me, the sound of laughter returned inside the restaurant. I walked toward my car with tears blurring my vision. I wasn't crying because of what Clarissa did. I was crying because Mark let her. That was the night I realized I didn't lose my son all at once. I had been losing him for years. One silent moment at a time. He used to wrap his arms around my waist and call me his favorite person in the world. Mark was 4 when his father died in a mining accident, and from that day on, it was just the two of us. I remember sitting on the edge of our bed that night, staring at a folded uniform that smelled like coal and sweat, wondering how I'd keep a roof over our heads. We lived in a small house with creaky floors and a water heater that groaned in winter. I picked up extra shifts at the clinic, then cleaned motel rooms on the weekend. I learned how to stretch $1 into a full week's worth of meals and how to sew patches over holes in Mark's jeans. There were nights when I gave him the last of the soup and pretended I'd already eaten. He was a bright boy, always asking questions, always wanting to help. When he brought home straight A's, I taped them to the fridge like trophies. The first time he said he wanted to be a lawyer, I laughed. Not because I didn't believe him. I laughed because I did, and I was terrified I wouldn't be able to give him the life he deserved. I took out loans. I picked up night shifts. I clipped coupons and wore secondhand scrubs. There was one winter where our power got cut for 3 days. I tucked him into bed with 3 blankets and told him we were camping. He believed me, smiled, and asked if we could roast marshmallows next time. Every milestone he reached felt like a small miracle. When he got accepted to college, I cried on the bus ride to work. When he got his law school acceptance letter, I cried again. But this time I was alone in the kitchen, the envelope shaking in my hands. I didn't go to the graduation. I told him I didn't want to make a fuss, but really I couldn't afford the flight. He sent me pictures. His smile in those photos was the same one I saw when he was 5 hugging a plastic fire truck. He used to call me every week, sometimes just to say thank you, sometimes just to check if I'd eaten. He told me once when he got his first real paycheck that none of it would have been possible without me. I still remember the words. "You're my world, Mom. Everything I do for you." I held on to that sentence like it was stitched into my bones. And now he lets his wife slap me in public while he pretends not to notice. I look at that night in the restaurant and try to square it with the boy who once refused to let go of my hand during thunderstorms. I try to understand how the boy who used to cry when I scraped my knee could become a man who wouldn't flinch when my dignity was ripped apart. Somewhere along the way, the lines between love and tolerance blurred, and I didn't notice. I wonder if all mothers feel this. That slow drift of distance the moment you realize you're no longer needed, just tolerated. I thought I raised him better. I thought love would be enough. The truth is, I never expected much in return. Just a phone call now and then. A seat at the table. Maybe a birthday card with my name spelled right. I didn't need gifts or vacations or praise. I just wanted to still matter. The photo album I made wasn't just paper and glue. It was the only way I knew how to say I still remember you. I still carry every version of you in my heart. But to them, it was garbage. And I was just the woman who used to wipe his nose and couldn't afford a real present. That's what hurts the most. Not the slap. Not even the silence. It's knowing that I gave everything I had to raise a good man, and somewhere along the line, I lost him to a life I never belonged in. It didn't all fall apart at once. It came in small, almost invisible pieces. The kind of cuts that don't bleed right away, but ache for years. The first time was Thanksgiving. I showed up with my homemade stuffing, still warm in the pan. Clarissa smiled tightly, said the table was full, then pointed me to the kitchen. She handed me a folding chair and set a plate on the counter. I told myself it was fine. Maybe she just didn't plan for so many people. The next time was Christmas. I wrapped Mark's gift in the same snowflake paper I used when he was little. Clarissa opened it instead. A wool scarf I knit by hand. She held it up like it smelled funny. Said it looked like something from a thrift store. Mark laughed. I laughed too, but only with my mouth. There were birthdays where I sat through dinner without being asked a single question. Barbecues where they forgot I didn't eat red meat. Times when I spoke and no one looked up. They didn't yell. They didn't insult me outright. But they made me feel like I was furniture. Something to be stepped around. One 4th of July, I brought lemon bars for dessert. Clarissa said they clashed with her theme. Red, white, and blue only. She scraped them into the trash while I stood in the doorway. Mark was too busy showing off his new grill to notice. There was that night with the wine. I'd picked up Clarissa's glass by mistake. She grabbed it from my hand, splashed it on my blouse, then said, "Now we're even." Even for what I never asked. Mark wiped the table and didn't look at either of us. The worst part wasn't the moments themselves. It was the excuses I made for them. They're tired. They're stressed. She's not used to older people. He's stuck in the middle. I gave them every benefit of the doubt, even when the doubt started eating me alive. There were holidays where I sat in their guest room, listening to laughter from downstairs. They said it was just easier to have dinner with friends that year. Once I offered to help with the dishes, and Clarissa said, "Just relax. You're the guest, remember?" But her smile told a different story. One that said, "Stay out of the way." I stopped bringing food. I stopped suggesting anything. I showed up, sat quietly, and left early. I thought that if I was less trouble, they'd start to include me again. Instead, I just became easier to ignore. When Mark did speak to me, it was with that distant tone, the kind people use with strangers on the phone. He never called to check in, never asked if I needed anything. I told myself he was busy building a life. I tried not to sound hurt when I left voicemails. He didn't return. Sometimes I watched them from across the table, whispering in each other's ears, giggling like teenagers. I'd smile when they looked over, even when I knew they weren't laughing with me. I told myself love meant patience. But love should never feel like erasure. I didn't want to believe my son had turned into someone who could look through me. I didn't want to believe that everything I'd poured into him could be forgotten. But each gathering made it harder to ignore. Each silent dinner, each forced grin, each glance exchanged between them like I wasn't there. It was a slow fade. 1,000 little moments that told me I didn't belong. Not in their home. Not in their life. Maybe not even in their story. I clung to the past because it was warmer than the present. But even memories can only hold you for so long before the silence swallows them too. I wore the green dress he used to love. It had been years since I put it on, but I wanted to feel like someone who still belonged. The fabric was older now, faded at the seams, but it fit the same, and when I looked in the mirror, I thought maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't look out of place tonight. The restaurant buzzed with chatter and glasses clinking, but I kept my voice low and polite. I greeted everyone with a small smile and found my seat at the corner of the long table. Clarissa looked stunning, of course, in a black cocktail dress that shimmered under the soft lights. She glanced at me once, gave me a tight smile, then turned to the guest beside her. I didn't expect a warm welcome, but I thought maybe if I kept my head down and didn't draw attention, it would be a peaceful night. I reached for my water glass, hands a little shaky, and that's when it happened. My sleeve brushed a wine flute, and it tipped just enough to spill across the pristine white tablecloth. The room seemed to hold its breath. Clarissa's head turned slowly. Her eyes dropped to the spreading red stain, then to my hands. Her voice cut through the hum. "Is she drunk?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I hadn't touched a drop. Just water. But the word hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. I looked to Mark, searching his face for a sign. A defense? Anything. Instead, he slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "Enough," he barked. His tone wasn't angry at her. It was embarrassed. At me. As if I had disrupted something sacred. Clarissa's eyes narrowed, then softened into a smirk. She leaned toward me, her perfume too strong, her voice low and sharp. "You are an embarrassment. You always have been." No one moved. No one offered a napkin or a hand. I stood slowly, feeling like I was underwater. The heat from my face had nothing to do with the wine. I stepped back from the table, gripping the back of my chair to keep steady. Mark looked down at his plate. Clarissa turned back to her conversation, laughing before I even reached the end of the table. I walked out without a coat. I didn't say goodbye. Outside, the air slapped my face harder than her words ever could. I stood on the curb, unsure where to go, my car parked blocks away. Lights from the restaurant blurred in my eyes as I took a breath that didn't want to come. No one followed. No one cared. And for the first time in my life, I truly felt like I didn't exist. The wind cut through my dress like it wasn't even there. I wrapped my arms around myself and walked, not because I knew where I was going, but because standing still felt worse. My shoes pinched with every step, but I barely noticed. Behind me, I heard footsteps. I didn't turn around. I knew it was him. Mark's voice came quiet, like he wasn't sure if I'd listen. "Clarissa feels bad," he said. His tone was flat rehearsed. I stopped walking and looked straight ahead. My voice felt small but steady. "Do you?" The silence between us was louder than anything he could have said. After a few seconds, I heard him turn back. I kept walking. The streets were mostly empty. Just the hum of distant traffic and my heels tapping on cracked sidewalk. I passed a bakery where we used to get cookies when he was little. The lights were off. By the time I got home, the house felt colder than the outside. I hung up my coat even though it didn't matter. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, listening to the silence settle around me like dust. There was a journal in the drawer I hadn't opened in years. I flipped to the last page. My handwriting looked older than I remembered. My hand trembled just slightly as I wrote the words. "I think I died tonight. But maybe it's time to start over." Then I closed the book and left it there. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat with the quiet. And for the first time, I let it hold me. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. The air inside the house felt different, not lighter exactly, just clearer. I sat in the same chair where I used to sort coupons and count out grocery change. This time, I opened the file folder I kept at the back of the cabinet. My fingers ran over the envelopes, the ones with the brokerage statements and deed papers. Each page reminded me of the choices I made when no one was looking. I wasn't rich in the way people flash around. No designer handbags. No fancy vacations. But I was never poor either. I just chose not to spend. I chose quiet. The first account held nearly $1 million in index funds. Long-term growth. Steady, boring, safe. The next showed dividends reinvested for over 20 years. That was the account I started after Mark got his first scholarship. I had been saving ever since. Then came the deeds. 3 small homes across town. All rented, all managed by the same man I met through the church. They paid for themselves within 10 years. Now they brought in more income than I needed. The final envelope held bonds. My husband's bought before we were even married. I never touched them. Not once. Not even when money was tight or the fridge went empty. I always knew they were for something bigger. Something final. I looked at the totals, all neatly typed. A little over 2.7 million, not counting what sat in my checking account. Not bad for a woman they said brought nothing to the table. Not bad for someone mocked for giving a photo album instead of gold. The truth is, I lived simply because I didn't want my worth to be tied to things. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I had. That was my test. And they failed it. Every insult, every cold shoulder, every moment of silence, I remembered it all. Not with anger anymore. Just with clarity. I saw them for who they really were. And I finally saw myself again, too. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't forgotten. I was waiting. Watching. And now I was done. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer that same afternoon. My voice didn't shake. I told him exactly what I wanted. Remove Mark from the will. No shares, no trusts, no explanations. Everything was to go to Golden Arms, a nonprofit I'd quietly supported for years. They cared for people like me, the forgotten ones. the ones who sat alone in silence while the world moved past them. We scheduled a meeting. I signed the documents without hesitation. I didn't cry. I didn't second guess myself. I just turned the page. Next, I called the property manager. I gave notice on my own house. I asked him to sell it after I left and donate the proceeds too. He didn't ask why. He'd known me long enough to understand that when I spoke like this, I meant it. I opened a map and drew a small circle around a quiet town I'd visited once in my 20s. Somewhere green and still. I found a small rental cottage near the edge of a park. No neighbors, no expectations, just quiet and space to breathe. I changed my mailing address. I canceled the landline. I wrote down the few phone numbers I actually wanted to keep, which turned out to be none at all. I let go of the rest. The more I erased, the lighter I felt. No more waiting for calls that wouldn't come. No more Sunday dinners spent biting my tongue. No more birthdays that ended in tears. They would search for the version of me they used to ignore. They would wonder what happened, what changed. But by the time they asked, I would already be gone. This wasn't revenge. It was closure. It was me choosing peace over pain. Dignity over obligation. It was me finally living on my own terms. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone's mother, someone's burden, someone's shame. I just felt like Eleanor, whole, free, and finally at peace with the silence. The phone rang just after noon. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to pick up anyway. It was Mark. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. He said he wanted to talk. Said Clarissa had been emotional that night and that things had gotten out of hand. He asked if I could find it in my heart to sit down, just the three of us, and talk it through. I let the silence stretch. Then I said no. He didn't argue. He just sighed like someone who finally understood that the door was no longer there. I told him I wished him well. I didn't wish Clarissa harm. But I wasn't going to rewrite the past for their comfort. I wasn't going to pretend I had imagined it all. He asked if he could stop by the house, just to talk in person. I told him I wouldn't be there. And then I hung up. That night, while the sun set behind the trees, I packed the last of my things into 2 suitcases. I stood for a while in the empty living room, letting the silence settle one last time. The walls had heard so much. I hoped they would forget me gently. I left one thing behind. A single envelope placed in the center of the kitchen table. No name on the front. Just a small card inside sitting quietly under the overhead light. By the time they pulled up the next day, I was already hours away. Driving north along a quiet highway, windows, cracked open hair, brushing my cheeks in the wind. I didn't check my phone. I didn't wonder what they were thinking. Mark walked into the house like someone expecting comfort. Clarissa trailed behind, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room. Everything was gone. Except the table. And the envelope. He opened it slowly. The handwriting was familiar. Just one sentence. You had your chance. And you threw it away. There was no signature. No goodbye. Nothing more to say. Outside, the wind pushed against the trees. Inside, nothing moved. No one cried. No one shouted. But they both stood there longer than they meant to, staring at a table that used to hold their excuses. That was the last they saw of me. And it was enough. The town I chose wasn't much to look at on a map. Just a few streets, a grocery store, a diner with blue booths, and a quiet little park with benches that faced the sunrise. But from the moment I arrived, it felt like the kind of place that still had room for someone like me. I moved into a small cottage with creaky floors and wide windows that let in the morning light. There was a rose bush by the porch that someone else had planted long ago, and I made it mine. Every day I watered it with the same care I used to give to everyone else. Golden Arms sat 2 blocks from my house. It didn't look like much from the outside, but inside there were people who smiled when I walked in. They called me Miss Eleanor, offered me tea, and told me stories that made us both laugh. I read to them on Tuesdays. On Thursdays, I helped sort donated clothes. Sometimes I just sat beside someone who needed company. I wasn't there to fix anyone, just to be present. And that was enough. No one cared about what I had or didn't have. No one judged the way I dressed or how I spoke. They didn't ask what went wrong in my life. They only cared that I showed up. And every time I left, someone thanked me. I found myself waking up without dread. I cooked meals I enjoyed. I started walking after dinner. The quiet didn't hurt here. It felt earned. Sometimes I'd pass by a mother and her son at the park, and for a moment I'd feel a flicker of something old. But it didn't crush me anymore. It just reminded me that I had once given everything I had, and that I survived. I wasn't invisible in this place. I wasn't someone to be tolerated. I was Eleanor, a woman who had been broken and still chose to begin again. At 68, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel left behind. I felt whole. I felt strong. And for the first time in years, I felt proud. Not because someone else said I should be, but because I had built something new and I had done it all on my own. I didn't share this because I wanted anyone to feel sorry for me. I'm not telling this story for attention or sympathy. I'm telling it because someone else out there might need to hear it. For a long time, I thought silence was surrender. I thought staying quiet meant I had no strength left. But now I understand. Silence can be a kind of power, the kind that waits, watches, and chooses its moment. You don't have to shout to reclaim your worth. You don't need permission to start over. Sometimes the quietest one in the room is the one who knows exactly who they are. I used to be afraid that walking away meant giving up. But I see now that walking away is sometimes the bravest thing we can do. And I walked into something better. Not everyone will see your value. That doesn't mean it's not there. It just means they weren't meant to hold it. So if you're quiet, if you feel small, if you've been pushed aside, don't mistake that for weakness. You might be holding more power than you know. I found mine when I stopped waiting to be loved the way I deserved. I found it in the silence, and I kept it for myself.